Dave Kelsen, and I'd like to tell you a story. This one comes from John Mugaas, and it's titled An Unspoken Eulogy. The insistent ringing of the phone hammered in my ears. I struggled to overcome the sticky paralysis of sleep and floundered toward wakefulness. The bedside clock read 5 a.m. January 12th. I knew who was calling and why, and I dreaded it. I cleared my throat and mumbled, "Hello." My mother's voice, clear and sharp, said, "Your father died about 2 hours ago." My father, the fourth of 9 children, was born April 8, 1908, on a homestead in Renfield County, North Dakota. His Norwegian immigrant parents christened him Magnus, but in Dillon, Montana, where he died 92 years later, everyone called him Mac. He came to Dillon in 1932, a Depression-area drifter, looking for work and opportunity. He found both and stayed on for 68 years. In 1937, he married a local girl, my mother. They had 2 children, and he made his living as a barber until his retirement in 1974. Unfortunately, during the last years of his life, the slow, insidious pall of dementia cast an ever-lengthening shadow over his awareness of the present. It pushed his reality back in time, far beyond our shared memories, to the homestead years of his youth and young manhood. In December, just 2 weeks before he died, I spent 10 days with him. When I first saw him on that last visit, it shocked me to see how much he had failed since August and how imminent death seemed. In August, I could occasionally coax him into conversation, not about the news or something we had done together, or the folly of a friend or relative, but conversation about his boyhood and young manhood on the North Dakota prairie. Conversation about boys called on at an early age to do men's work. Boys who shivered in the thin, colorless pre-dawn light as they prepared their horses for the day's labor. Powerful, massive draft horses, stomping, tossing their heads, rolling their eyes, and snorting. Boys ministering to their horses with a reassuring voice, firm, gentle hands, curry combs, brushes, harnesses, and the morning's ration of grain, hay, and water. Boys and their horses sweating together, in the fields, plowing, harrowing, sowing, and if enough rain fell and hail or grasshoppers didn't destroy the crops, harvesting in the golden days of late summer and autumn. Boys and horses in winter, enduring the long, cold days, spent hauling the harvest by wagon to grain elevators at distant railroad stops. Conversations about life in a society where men gave more care to their horses than to themselves, and taught their sons that same ethic. You could tell from the way he talked about them that he loved those horses. Their strong, pungent aroma, their giant feet, their silky noses, and soft, nibbling lips that hid their big yellow teeth. During the last 10 bittersweet days I spent with him, I could still get him to talk once in a while if I asked about the horses. But his answers came in a whispered mumble that I could not understand. This frustrated me. I wanted to know what he had to say about the horses, the work in the fields, their crops, his family, or the winter storms that swept over him and his team as they plodded, numb with cold, between home and the grain elevators. After he finished these whispered soliloquies, he would look at me with a sweet, tender smile that brought a lump to my throat. The hardest of those days came when I had to leave him and return to my home in West Virginia. I sat in front of his wheelchair, held his hands, and told him I loved him. He had never been a huggy-kissy kind of guy, but I hugged him anyway. Kissed his cheek, said my last goodbye. He pulled me a little closer, whispered something to me in that mumbled whisper. Maybe he was talking to those who would soon be caring for him, and that sweet smile was his way of saying, "It's all right, I'm ready." Don't worry about me, I'll be in good hands. On the bleak, dismal day before my father's funeral, I brooded, my mood as gloomy as the thick clouds holding the sun at bay. I sulked, not only about the fact that I had not been with my father when he died, but also about how his dementia had robbed him of his ability to fully share the last years of his life with us. All day long, cold, gusty winds rattled the house, and occasionally brief, violent snow flurries squeezed visibility to near zero and deepened my melancholy. That night we gathered for the wake. The winds moderated, the snow flurries stopped. A few stars peeked at us through ragged holes in the scudding remnants of shredded clouds. Standing by his casket, I studied my father's face, held his folded hands, and reflected on our last 10 days together. Had he known me? Where in time had his mind settled? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but it didn't matter. We had spent those days together. That had meant a lot to both of us. These thoughts dispelled some of the gloom that haunted me. The next day, a winter sun rose over the snow-covered landscape. It blazed in a cloudless sky of deepest morning glory blue, producing the kind of day my father had loved. Early that morning, members of the family gathered to attend the final viewing and the funeral mass. We left the comfortable warmth of my parents' home. The frigid glare of the sun-dazzled snow anointed and purified us. For an instant, the intense light stunned me. It captured me in a brilliant, icy crystal, blinding me to everything but its lustrous white light. Time retired, and the freezing air, honed to a perfect cutting edge, pierced me and pared away layer upon layer of vanity and self-pity. After the Mass, our little funeral procession wound through town and then turned onto Sweetwater Road. It would take us the 1.5 miles to the cemetery, snow-covered fields on either side of the road, shimmering like liquid fire under the searing glare of the sun. My mother sighed and exclaimed with delight at how fresh and clean everything looked. It was then that we saw the horses off to our right. 20 or so of them came trotting across the field toward our slow-moving procession. Their hooves stirred the light, powdery snow, and the gusting winds flung it around them in a glittering white cloud. When they neared the road, the horses changed direction in a graceful arc until they drew alongside our procession, becoming a part of it, quickening their pace to stay abreast of the hearse, a cortege of flying hooves. Manes and tails flowed in the whirling snow. I thought, wow, Dad must love this. I feared the horses would stop or turn away and run to the far side of the field, but to our delight, they kept up with us. A light-hearted playfulness animated their movements and turned their determined march into a kind of joyful frolic. They kept pace with the hearse, their progress marked by the glittering cloud of wind-whipped flying snow that, like spume blown from a wave, swirled over them and us. About 1/8 mile from the entrance to the cemetery, a fence perpendicular to the road blocked any further advance of the horses. As we swept past it, they swerved to the right and vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. If the fence hadn't blocked them, I believe they would have followed the hearse to the gravesite and joined in the burial service. When we returned to town, the horses stood on the far side of the field, feeding on hay that had been scattered for them. They paid no attention to us. Again and again I looked in their direction, longing to see a repeat of their performance. But deep in my heart, I knew their tribute was complete, and I drew great solace from their elegant eulogy.